I've been saying for weeks now that in a crisis like this, we all need to get behind our leaders, and judging by today's news poll, that's exactly what Australia's done. In the preferred Prime Minister stake, Scott Morrison has leapt ahead. His net approval numbers are the best they've ever been, and deservedly so. Now, as good as today's result might be, the Prime Minister and his team would know not to read anything more into today's numbers than Australians wanting to come together at a time like this. And nevertheless, there's no doubt it's got to be heartening for all involved in the Morrison government's relentless work trying to keep us safe and the economy sound, that the public are with them. And credit too to Morrison and his Treasurer Josh Frydenberg for not letting small government ideology allow businesses closed down or without trade as a result of quarantine measures to just fend for themselves. Of course, the cost of the JobKeeper allowance will be felt for years. These are extreme measures for extreme times. And knowing when to do it by the book and when to leave the rule book on the shelf is one of the real tests of leadership. Critically here, of course, will be the mechanisms they use to unwind this taxpayer support at some time in the future, because unwind it they must, lest today's safety net become the fiscal noose around the next generation's neck. And that's because no matter how necessary this spending might be, in the end, it must be paid for. And again here, to his credit, the Prime Minister hasn't gilded the lily. He hasn't given the glib assurances that all jobs can be saved or all lives either. Nor has he, above all, sought to blame anyone else when things have gone wrong. Indeed, one of the first things the Prime Minister said to us at the start of this crisis is that 2020 will be the worst year of most people's lives. He said that many businesses will close, untold jobs will be lost, and the dreams of millions will be shattered. And for this honesty, the public have rewarded his grim realism with the strongest preferred PM rating anyone has had in more than a decade. And I guess the PM's performance at a Commonwealth level heightens the contrast with some of our states. By any standard, letting sick and infected passengers stream off the Ruby Princess was a massive stuff-up. The Premier should have accepted that from the beginning this was a grave mistake and apologised straight away. Instead, her first instinct was to blame it on the feds. Now, as I see it, people respect you more for admitting error than denying it, especially when it's so patently obvious that something horribly went wrong. I've a lot of respect for Gladys Berejiklian, and particularly coming out of this summer's fire season in particular. But leaders get the title when they're prepared to take responsibility for the good, that's the easy part, but also the bad. She's not helped, though, by that clown who is her health minister. Listen to Brad Hazzard on my colleague Sharry Markson's program last night.
Particular 4 physicians who are involved from the public health unit have been doing this work for a long, long while, and I understand that at least one of them is a consultant in communicable diseases to the World Health Organization. So, as Health Minister, I could not have asked for any higher qualifications for the professional medical people making the decision. And I think the community should be satisfied that we had the best of the best making the decision.
Is it any wonder people hold the politicians like this bloke in such low regard, when this is the sort of lame response you get from the man in charge of health in New South Wales, who under his watch allowed thousands of infected passengers disembark the Ruby Princess in the middle of the night, I might add, only to then spread coronavirus across the country. Under Brad Hazzard's watch, over 600 Australians have now been infected and 12 have sadly died from this one ship alone. I know how the system works. I know that when the federal minister signed an order declaring that no one was to get off that ship, the state counterpart minister would have been advised, and particularly so, office to office, given they're both Liberal governments. I also know that Hazzard hiding behind health bureaucrats is a sort of weak behaviour that voters reject, and his political colleagues too, because many of them now want Hazzard moved on. In my experience behind the scenes, when events of this magnitude occur, stuff up beats conspiracy every time. People would have a lot more respect for Hazzard and indeed the Premier if 2 weeks ago when this mess happened they both fronted the cameras, they took responsibility and admitted there were mistakes made. Instead, trying to lay the blame elsewhere, then to hide from the media as Hazzard did for a few days and now trot out that rubbish that he did on Sharry's show last night just shows how subpar, how out of their depth, indeed completely incompetent some of these state ministers like Hazzard truly are. Worse, I reckon this whole Ruby Princess affair just reinforces the public's impression that our states are much better at getting in the way than getting things done. Out of this, as I said, there'll be a lot of lessons for Australia to learn. More national self-reliance, more local manufacturing, less kowtowing to China, less blind faith in global bodies, but also how hopelessly over-governed we are in Australia. And once we've had a good look at them too, how poor some of our state politicians actually are. If ministerial responsibility is to mean anything, Brad Hazzard should go. He should have gone days ago. And every time he puts his head up, he just reminds all of us who care about integrity and competency in public life that on every single count, this idiot is an abject, miserable failure.